My name's Bill Rote, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Research and Development at Travere Therapeutics, a biopharmaceutical company located in San Diego, focused exclusively on identifying, developing, and delivering life-changing therapies for patients with rare disease. Many of us at Travere are rare disease patients, survivors, and caregivers, and our mission to this community is personal. You'll often hear us say that we are proud to be in rare for life. On behalf of everyone at Travere Therapeutics, thank you for making time out of your busy schedules to join us here in Washington, D.C. The rare disease journey is not well understood by many others, including policymakers, so your efforts here have a very large impact. The rare disease community, patients and industry together, face many challenges, making clinical trials more diverse so therapies get to all the patients that need them. Modernizing newborn screening so that the diagnostic odyssey is shortened. Enhancing the Orphan Drug Act to meet the ever-growing unmet needs across the community. Incorporating life-altering advances in diagnostics, gene and cell therapy into our healthcare system. And finally, protecting the critical accelerated approval pathway. With respect to accelerated approval, Travere has been a proud partner with the rare kidney disease community for nearly 10 years. And I am particularly pleased to share that less than 2 weeks ago, our novel therapy for IgA nephropathy, a rare kidney disorder, was approved under accelerated approval. On behalf of all the patients in the trials, all the investigators, and all of my colleagues on a massive team at Travere, thank you for that applause. Accelerated approval is so critical for patients to access treatments as soon as possible in areas of high unmet need. For IgA nephropathy, it's estimated that over 150,000 people live with IgA nephropathy in the US and have gone decades without a new treatment option. You will hear Malkia's inspiring, humbling, and courageous journey later today. She's one of those rare disease patients who have been waiting. And Malkia's journey is unique to her, but she is not alone. All 30 million of us touched by a rare disease know what it means to be part of this community. In 1960, then Senator John F. Kennedy announced he was running for president in this very room. At that time, he described the American people as confident, courageous, and persevering. This is an apt description for all rare disease families. You're confident in your love for your family. You're courageous because living with a rare disease is a day-to-day, never-ending battle. And everyone here has to persevere in so many ways. Finding a clinical trial, raising money needed to fund research, or just dealing with the administrative hassles needed to get to the care you need. Which is why I'll end by thanking you. In this room today, and when you visit lawmakers this week, you will carry with you the hopes and dreams of 30 million Americans. Americans who are touched by rare disease. It's an honor to walk this path with you. The road will be easier and the future brighter because of you. So with that, I'm pleased to turn the podium over to Esther Krofa. She's the EVP of Health at the Center for Public Health at the Milken Institute, who will be your moderator for today's caucus briefing. Esther?
Thank you so much, Dr. Rote, for your inspiring comments. Good morning and welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending this briefing on strengthening the novel therapy development ecosystem for rare diseases, especially as we're coming to the end of Rare Disease Week. As the moderator of this discussion, I want to start by reminding all of us, and we already heard some remarks, of why we are all gathered in this room today. We're gathered because we need to put people people at the center of biomedical research and the full research ecosystem. This issue area is especially near and dear to me as the leader of Faster Cures, where we have worked for over 20 years to build a system that is effective, efficient, is driven by a clear mission to accelerate the development of treatments and cures for all diseases, centered on the needs of patients above all else. So whether you are here today to learn about the issues faced by the rare disease community, as an individual living with a rare disease, or as a representative of a disease organization, you have a critical role to play in advancing progress in therapeutic development. In fact, many of the approvals today would not be possible without the funding and the leadership of the rare disease advocacy community. This year marks the 40th anniversary of the Orphan Drug Act, which stimulated the development of drugs for rare diseases. This law was the hard-won result of pioneering patient advocates and forward-thinking legislators from both sides of the aisle who recognized the need to encourage manufacturers to invest in the rare disease space. Thanks to the Orphan Drug Act, the FDA has issued more than 1,100 orphan-designated approvals. However, despite these wins, 95% of the more than 10,000 rare diseases affecting nearly 400 million people around the world still have no FDA-approved treatment. According to a 2019 study from the Every Life Foundation, the cost of rare diseases were estimated to be $1 trillion. The study revealed that nearly 60% of that cost is borne by families and communities. So while our mighty rare disease community, in partnership with congressional and agency champions, have done exceptional work to reshape the rare disease landscape, much more needs to be done. And now here we are in 2023 as a critical inflection point. The 118th Congress includes 80 newly elected members, which presents exciting opportunities to engage these new lawmakers on the priorities for our rare disease community. The recently passed and PDUFA 7 is underway in terms of implementation, and it reflects the robust involvement of the rare disease community. The FY23 Omnibus package included funding for much-needed enhancements to rare disease regulatory and research infrastructure that was championed by this community. At the same time, when the scientific advances have made treatments more accessible, the incentives established by the Orphan Drug Act very much need to be protected. The time to catalyze progress in rare disease is now. We must build upon our strong foundation and seize the opportunities in front of us. That is why I am so excited for the panel that we have today with esteemed leaders, advocates, patients that have been leading the way in supporting and promoting the development of therapies for rare diseases for their career. I will begin by introducing individuals as they speak, and then we will end our time today with a very short Q&A. First, I'd like to introduce Annie Kennedy, who in fact needs no introduction for many who are in this room. Annie is the Chief of Policy, Advocacy, and Patient Engagement at the Every Life Foundation. She has served within this community for nearly 3 decades. Throughout her roles with the Every Life Foundation, the Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, and the Muscular Dystrophy Association. In that time, she has led numerous legislations and access efforts for new therapies, including those approved in Duchenne. She has worked with ICER. She's modified frameworks for ultra-rare diseases. Annie, thank you for your leadership on the most recent study with the National Economic Burden of Rare Disease. Look forward to your comments.
Thank you so much, Esther. Good morning. Thank you everyone for being here this morning. So Esther just gave a really nice summary of the state of rare diseases. So just to give a little more expansion of that, we're just going to give a little level set. So as Esther just mentioned, there's a conservative estimate that we represent more than 30 million Americans living with rare diseases. So we want to thank everyone who traveled here to Washington today to represent our community. That represents more than 10,000 rare diseases, over 50% of which are pediatric onset conditions. As Esther mentioned, the economic impact of living with a rare disease was recently estimated to be over $1 trillion in 2019. Again, a conservative estimate. And within that study, we found something that validated the lived experience of many of us in the rare disease community, that 60% of those costs are shouldered directly by families and the community. Fewer than 5% of those of us in the rare disease community have an FDA-approved product. And as many of us know, it takes an average 15 years and a staggering $1 billion to get to one FDA-approved therapy. But there's good news. And the good news is that we are a part of a rare disease ecosystem, and we're not doing any of this alone. We have really robust collaborations comprised of stakeholders with a shared commitment to optimized outcomes for our rare disease community. But we need to increase the critical incentives that drive each inflection point within our ecosystem. Rare disease is complex. Those of us living with rare diseases, the developers in this room understand this well. We have very small numbers of patients within each of our communities. Within each of our communities, patients progress differently. We have extensive unnecessary diagnostic odysseys. That study that we've cited also found that the mean diagnostic odyssey of a rare disease patient is 6.3 years and includes 17 specialists. And that's if you're lucky enough to successfully navigate that diagnostic odyssey. There are limited clinical care guidelines, and it is very difficult to access clinical experts. There are often inappropriate outcome measures, few biomarkers, and very few surrogate endpoints in rare diseases. The urgency and unmet need in rare disease requires that placebos not be utilized in rare disease. It is unethical to require that patients enroll in clinical trials and not have access at all during that trial duration to active product. And the variability to approaches within the review of applications between and within centers and divisions makes clinical trial conduction within rare diseases unpredictable and inconsistent, adding further to the complexity. And as my colleague here, Pat Furlong, often says, what is meaningful is not always what can be measured, as many of us in rare disease know very well. And time within our community is our most precious commodity. In terms of our benefit-risk trade-offs in the rare disease community, doing nothing is doing harm. When you're living with a progressive rare disease, we must do something. But we're here because there's really good news. And the good news is that we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of the ODA. We're celebrating 40 years of progress. Just a quick show of hands of those in the room who are living with rare diseases. How many people in the room are a part of a community that has benefited from an FDA approval? So how many people have an FDA approved product? Excellent. But we have so much more to do. How many people in the room are a part of the more than 90% of the community who have yet to have an FDA approved product for your community? And then going back to those who raised your hand the first time, of those who have an FDA approved product, how many of those have been cured completely? So when we talk about those 5%, we still have much more to do. So we have so much potential. It's estimated that currently in our pipelines, there are more than 700 diseases that have therapies that have potential products in the pipelines for disease-modifying therapies. But we need more incentives, more resources, more regulatory predictability and consistency. Our time as a community is now. We need to ensure that we can transform the promise of our pipelines, today's pipelines, for our rare disease community who is here with us, living with rare diseases today. So we thank everyone for being here with us, and we especially thank our panelists who are going to talk about what those incentives can look like for our members of Congress who could help us with policies today.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Annie, for those remarks. I would now like to introduce and welcome Ritu Baral. Ritu is a managing director and senior biotechnology analyst at TD Cowen. Ritu has been in the financial investment industry for most of her career. She has been with TD Cowen since August of 2014 and has been on the board of directors of the EveryLife Foundation since September of that year. Welcome, Ritu.
Thanks, Esther. So I'm here to give you the investor perspective on rare disease drug development today. And 2022-2023 has been a really rough year for biotech investors. As a growth industry, rising interest rates have hit the investability of growth stocks like biotech really, really hard, especially those small, unprofitable, Jobs Act, scrappy biotechs that are most interested in developing cutting-edge technologies. Some things you can't do anything about. Other things are unforced errors causing collateral damage, and rare disease patients are starting to become the collateral damage of the unforced errors in promoting new treatments for rare conditions with tremendous unmet needs. So when ODA was enacted, rare disease patient groups of 200,000 or less were seen as, at best, not worth it. At worst, frankly, unprofitable and not worth going after. Then we had the ODA, which added incentives that fundamentally changed the investability of these programs, and there were meaningful investor returns with acceptable amount of risk in a not crazy, not super risky time frame, 5 to 10 years or so. And these incentives, by the way, had the most impact for these same sort of Jobs Act, small, unprofitable companies. They were the pioneers. They had nothing to lose. If they didn't hit it, they were going out of business. And now we stand at the doorstep of the first wave of genetic medicines at a time when the science and the understanding of the diseases have put treatments within range for these communities. The incentives established by the ODA that led to these 40 years of progress are coming under threat, though. Cuts in the orphan drug tax, key features in the recent Inflation Reduction Act, and legislative initiatives that undercut or are blind to innovation, blind to the innovation that real investment requires. And if innovation isn't valued, it will disappear. The net result is that what's left of the ODA, weathered and dated that it is, has raised the bar for investment. And it's not low enough for enough of the patients in our community. Regulatory inflexibility and reimbursement hurdles have made diseases with less than 10,000 patients, that ultra-rare population, optically uninvestable. These factors have also made curative gene therapies for populations of less than 1,000 uninvestable. These figures and thresholds are floating around Wall Street. Our investor excels, rarely acknowledged, but ever present. You can't make the numbers work for a disease with less than 10,000 patients in the current environment. A number of large pharmas have said this out loud. It's like a blast from the past before ODA. It's too small to move the needle. And while for large pharmas this means moving the needle on profitability, for the kind of company that will actually develop something groundbreaking for patients, again, those Jobs Act companies that for years, like a decade, 2 decades, live on incoming investment money, not profits, it's a matter of survival. Every week right now in this, what we call the bear market, every week another one of these companies goes out of business. Every week it's another program shuttered. And the provisions in the IRA have already led to emerging, unprofitable, highly innovative biotechs to abandon promising second rare disease indications on the vine. Halfway down, all of a sudden it doesn't make sense. The IRA incentivizes these little companies to go big or go home on population size. Basically, it shortens the clock on when their drug turns into a pumpkin, So when you know your drug's going to turn into a pumpkin, you go after the big fish first. And unfortunately, that's not us. Some have publicly said it, some haven't. It's in the filings, it's all there. We know it. So what are the levers that can make the most difference and drive that population threshold down past ultra rare, down past 1,000? Exclusivity. Investors, we call it duration of asset. Give an innovative treatment time to take root, time to be adopted and generate capital to fund the next round of innovation. And that is what we have seen in Duchenne's. And I'm not talking about evergreening, playing the patent game. Investors know that that is antithetical to innovation. It's the opposite of, and biotech investors don't want it. Reduction of regulatory risk. Allow the FDA to use their brains and hearts. Hire good ones, give them flexibility, give them space and resources to hear the patients and grasp the unmet need. And finally, give patients a voice. The voice of the patient is the voice of the market, frankly, and it's aligned with innovation. Patients and their families know what they need. The role of patient organizations has never been more directly relevant to advances in therapy development. In fact, many of today's approvals, as Esther mentioned, would never have been possible without the funding and leadership of rare disease patient advocacy groups, which drive home the need for regulatory flexibility and predictability and efficiency. Make no mistake. One more second, I'll stop. Make no mistake, rare disease investors here are on the side of the rare disease patient. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ritu. I've already jotted down, the voice of the patient is the voice of the market. Thank you. I would like to now introduce and welcome Dr. Emil Caucus. Dr. Caucus serves as the Chief Executive Officer and President of Ultragenyx. He founded Ultragenyx in 2010 to create a company that is uniquely built around a deep and meaningful engagement with patients and their caregivers to fully understand their needs. This includes designing a novel development model that fundamentally changed the established paradigms in clinical protocols, endpoints, and analyses, as well as challenging traditional beliefs around commercialization and access to therapies for patients with rare and ultra-rare genetic diseases. Welcome, Dr. Caucus.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. If I get this to work correctly. There we go. I'm going to talk about drug development in the 21st century. In the last century, there are some basic ideas of how you do drug development. Treating a patient, how they feel, function, survive. But as the science has progressed, as we understand what are the underlying causes of disease, we can measure them, we can diagnose them genetically. We're now on the cusp of doing something different with precision medicines. We need precision ways to measure disease. And we think we need to change the whole paradigm in order to understand how we're going to treat so many rare diseases and to do it more efficiently. I wrote an editorial on the drug development of the 21st century and time for a change, and I'll talk today about that. So, 40 years ago, we had the Orphan Drug Act came as an idea, and there's a lot of things in this interval that helped us start getting orphan drugs developed. And it's great to see all that has happened, but while many of the larger rare diseases have gotten developed, we know there's a lot of others not. And we know that the precision medicines that we're developing now have the opportunity to both diagnose and treat an incredible array of new diseases that we hadn't had years before. And despite that opportunity, as Ritu just said, in the last year, maybe 30 programs plus have been canceled, many of them promising, some of them with positive data. And at Ultragenyx, Abeona had their MPS III aging therapy, and they called me and said, we can't keep going. It's dragging us down, we can't go. And they threw us this baby and we caught it, even though we had so much going on ourselves. But it's quite a challenge. what's going on right now is not going to work. We need to change what we're doing and how we think about rare disease and how we think about development. And the Orphan Drug Act needs a next gen. It needs a 2.0 for the ultra rares that are currently still not getting that opportunity. And we need to think harder about how we do drug development, what the science tells us, so that we can actually do this efficiently. So the accelerated approval really should be a common way rare disease drugs, especially inborn errors, are getting developed. But the truth is, if you look at non-oncology, there's a handful of approvals, accelerated approvals, a handful, even though the science for what we're doing for many of our diseases is so clear and so obvious. The truth is, the review division that handle it have not got their heads around it. And now, as we have the technology to treat many rare and neurological, particularly complex diseases, it's really in front of us to be able to do this, but if we don't have this ability, we're going to basically fail to take advantage of the technology we have. And we need to be able to qualify biomarkers that are truly the source of disease and understand the science behind them, and not expect the kind of data you get from large market disorders as the way of proof. And so we have to identify what we call precise measures of disease to match our precision medicine technology. Now, Peter Marks recently talked about a need for Operation Warp Speed, but we've got to have a ship that actually get to warp speed. Right now, we don't have it. So I've been proposed in my editorial something I call primary disease activity biomarkers. What are these? There's a lot of biomarkers out there. These are just measures, blood or urine tests. And there's a sense that these are just random things we pick. But among all of them, in some diseases, we know exactly what these are. These are the thing that build up right behind that genetic block. That thing that builds up, we know, is the source and cause of all the problems. It is not a random biomarker. It's a direct measure of the underlying disease. A direct measure of underlying disease can be measured accurately, effectively, and we can look at response to treatments. And when the treatment is directed toward the underlying cause, right? Here's the block, we're fixing the block. That situation should be one where we readily get accelerated approval. That kind of science should give us the strength to move ahead. And if we can get this done, these techniques will be far more precise and accurate and far better than clinical endpoints. Clinical endpoints that are highly variable, highly dependent on various factors, how old the patient's other genetic factors, and other things that make it very hard to measure in these small populations. So I want to provide an analogy to you, because I think one of the things I'm trying to fundamentally do is stop thinking about biomarkers as a compromise, a cheap and easy way to get something done that doesn't really work. That's not what they are. When we're talking about these biomarkers, the ones at the core, the source, the cause, disease we're talking about is the underlying problem. And the analogy I like to use to get you to understand this is that the underlying cause of these is like having broken brakes on your car. The brakes are broken. You can measure the brakes are broken. You know how well the brakes are working. Now you know over time you're going to have a car crash. Whether you have a car crash depends on how you drive, what your car is like, what kind of driving conditions, how long it takes you to get to the car crash. The car crash is a clinical outcome. How fast you go down, what happens to you, it depends. But you know the brakes are broken, you're going to get a car crash at high risk. That is the difference between clinical outcomes, right, and cause of disease. You can measure brakes accurately, and you know if you fix the brakes, your risk of having a car crash goes down. It doesn't go to zero, because you can still have a crash even with good brakes. But you know that that relationship exists. When we talk about primary disease activity biomarkers, the core and source, we're talking about looking at the brakes and fixing the brakes. If they're broken, we know something's going wrong. You don't have to prove what went wrong. And we think this is a fundamental change in thinking about improving what goes on. Now, the best example for this really has been PKU. We were able to get phenylalanine levels. These patients have a block and the Phe goes up. It's toxic to the brain. You just need to get Phe down. We know we need to get Phe down. We don't need to look at neurocognitive outcomes, IQ, over years to figure out what's going on. Fortunately, there was enough diet data. We were able to get 2 products approved, but if that marker hadn't been used, we'd have 0 treatments and no other ones being developed, none. if we didn't have the biomarker. And Phe is a disease. It is the cause and source of disease. Now, to try to clarify for you one other example is HIV, and I bring up HIV because it is really key and important to understand that when accelerated approval was started, people thought, oh, we're just trying to get the first HIV drug to get it to the market a few months ahead. But the truth is, that's not really what happened. What ended up happening is we started measuring disease accurately in a way that opportunistic infections or hospitalization or death could never measure. By measuring the virus load accurately, good drugs were replaced by better drugs replaced by combination drugs, and within 16 years, you went from all of us in medicine thinking we're all going to die of AIDS to having chronic managed disease. That's the transformation of the drug development process. That is not just going a little faster. That's changing the nature of what disease is as the source of disease, not the outcome. We know the outcome matters, but if we focus on the source, we develop drugs that fix the source of disease, and that's how you get HIV treated. That's how you got Hep C treated. But that's not how we're getting rare diseases treated, and that's how we need to do it. If you look at my own example, I developed an enzyme therapy for MPS I, and if you look in the HIV story, there were 29 approvals in 16 years. But since my approval in the MPS enzyme therapy, Mark's here today, he's been on it all these years, I thought it was a temporary. I thought for like 8, 10 years and be better stuff. It's now 20 years. Because they required a clinical endpoint, there's no one can develop a better study because it's too complicated, it takes too many patients. They can't design the program, they're not gotten better, and yet, more than 10 companies, many of them had better opportunities, they could not get them approved. So we sit here with no one bar because the regulatory process is damaged. They made a mistake, and that mistake we suffer with today. So, what we need is a change here, and I've worked tirelessly. Well, actually, I'm tired, actually. I'm tired working with the FDA to make these changes. We need a change in how we do this. The Orphan Drug Act was great, but it's time to deal with the ultra-rare diseases where we know the science to accelerate and change what's going on, that we as patients and doctors and other people have to tell the FDA through Congress what it is we want them to be doing, how we want this science to come and deliver for us now that it's here. That we are not going to wait. We're not going to wait for another generation of patients that die doing natural history studies. We're not going to sit and watch companies form and crash and a whole nother generation of patients lost because no one can do it. We need to start changing the story with an Orphan Drug Act 2.0. We need to create a bill. We need to push upon the agency to start doing what we want as a community, what we need as a community, is to take all this precision medicine and put that science to work for our patients. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Caucus. I would like to welcome and introduce Malkia White. Next, Malkia is the ambassador at IgAN Foundation. The foundation's mission is to be a patient-centric organization focused on finding a cure for IgA nephropathy. Malkia is a kidney health advocate and kidney transplant recipient. Welcome, Malkia.
Good morning. 41 years ago, I was diagnosed with Berger's disease. Having always maintained a healthy lifestyle and routinely visiting my healthcare providers, I had no complications with Berger's disease. My life forever changed in December 2017 when I learned I was in renal failure. When I heard the phrase renal failure, I quickly thought about death, and just as quickly thought about how I was going to choose to live. I learned all that I could about chronic kidney disease, organ donation, dialysis, and transplantation, which all resulted in launching an informative social media campaign entitled "That Girl Needs a Kidney." For nearly 4 years, I lived by the grace of God and with the necessary treatments of hemodialysis. From August 19th, 2018 through April 29th, 2021, I received 6-hour in-center treatments 3 nights a week from 9 p.m. through 3 a.m., all while maintaining a full-time job in Arlington, Virginia. Living with IgA nephropathy is a lonely, challenging, and exhaustive, tarrying, lingering, and waiting in expectation. And waiting for a kidney transplant is actually a wait, W-E-I-G-H-T. I fought frustration, uncertainty, exhaustion, anxiety, anemia, sinus infections, and skin discoloration. An accumulation of all of these symptoms, plus the disappointment that no one completed the call to serve as my living kidney donor, led to depression. For the first 5 months of 2021, I was numb to everything. I spent 5 months wanting to sleep through all of my distressing feelings, wanting to wake up only after I received a kidney transplant. I spent 5 months communicating with my primary care physician, nephrologist, therapist, and dialysis nurses. And in April of 2021, with the support of my family and my village, I prepared to move back home to St. Louis, Missouri. The choice to relocate was easy because the estimated wait time for a kidney transplant in the DMV area is 7 to 8 years. The most amazing moment happened when I received my kidney transplant on November 29th of 2021. It was a miraculous gift from a deceased donor. And one might think that the journey is over at transplant. It's not. The journey doesn't end, it just travels a different direction. My road to recovery was full of detours that lasted 12 months. During my 10-day hospital stay after the surgery, a blood clot was removed and an artery in my leg dissected and had to be patched. I now still experience neuropathy in my right leg. And 1 month post-transplant, I was admitted to the hospital and learned that a blockage prevented urine from traveling to my bladder. I was discharged with a nephrostomy tube on New Year's Eve. The tube facilitated the collection of my urine in a drainage bag. I visited interventional radiology for five times to obtain a new nephrostomy tube because the blockage did not dissipate as anticipated. On May 27th of 2022, I was admitted to the hospital and underwent revision ureter surgery to remove the blockage. It turns out that the transplanted ureter was in a loop-de-loop, and they just straightened it out. I was discharged from the hospital on May 30th of 2022 with the nephrostomy tube, but minus the drainage bag and a Foley catheter. After 7 months of waiting and healing, the nephrostomy tube was completely removed on July 1st of 2022. If you're paying attention, you'll notice that many of these momentous occasions happened around holidays. Although I can say now that I do have a history of IgA nephropathy, there is a likelihood that IgA nephropathy will recur. And you have to keep in mind that a kidney transplant is treatment. It is not a cure. Strengthening novel therapy development is critical. As mentioned before, until 2021, approval of Tarpeo and last month's approval of sparsentan, very little existed to delay the disease progression. And currently, more than 15 trials exist for IgA nephropathy, and more than 35 clinical trials are in the pipeline for other rare kidney diseases. The rare kidney disease community awaits treatments that will improve our quality of life. We await remedies. We need congressional advocates to support legislation, research, and policies that will brighten our future. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Malkia, for sharing your story and the courage in that story of all of your journey going through that treatment process. We'd like to end the panel with hearing from Pat Furlong. Pat is the founding president and CEO of the Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, the largest nonprofit organization in the US solely focused on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Its mission is to improve the treatment, quality of life, and long-term outlook of all individuals affected by Duchenne through research, advocacy, education, and compassion. And I will underscore compassion because that is what Pat symbolizes. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and I am deeply grateful to be here today, to be a witness for rare disease. You see, I was here a long time ago when the discussion of rare diseases at the NIH was really empty, non-existent. And then there was an office that was opened as the Office of Rare Disease, or because everything in Washington, D.C. needs an acronym, it was the ORD, and it was led by Dr. Steve Groft. At that time, the office, as it was known, had very little money. And what that office could do was deliver a very small meeting that was disease-specific on the NIH campus. So in 2000, the ORD sponsored a meeting focused on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. This was the disease my sons had, and by that time, they were gone. They died at 15 and 17. It was the first meeting on the NIH campus focused on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Dr. Stephen Katz opened that meeting and said, "This meeting is at the request of Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, and today we'll focus on Duchenne." Sitting in that room that day, a door opened, and the halls of NIH echoed with hope for our community. All too often, the public focuses on things that Congress cannot agree on, rather than the things it can. Those of us in the Duchenne muscular dystrophy community know the power of what can happen when this kind of consensus meeting emerges. Members of Congress act in unison. 22 years ago, with no NIH research to speak of, and no disease-modifying treatments, and care for our families was spotty at best, thanks to the MD Care Act, sustained funding, and some regulatory flexibility, all approved by Congress, this landscape changed dramatically. With congressional support, the federal investment in research became a tipping point for neuromuscular diseases. Fast forward, in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, we have 5 approved treatments, and 1 on the horizon in the accelerated approval pathway, with our fingers crossed, for May. We now have a robust pipeline. It's rich with opportunity And with additional funding, incentives, and additional opportunities, we will gain new ground for people with rare diseases. Every person in this room should see a congressional office, go back to their companies, and talk about the Rare Disease Caucus. It matters. We have made incredible progress with rare diseases, but certainly not enough. Just yesterday, the FDA, or 2 days ago, the FDA approved the first therapy for Friedreich's ataxia. We can do more. We have to do more. The Small Office of Rare Disease has, yes. Congratulations to the FA community. It's pretty amazing, and we're thrilled for you. The Small Office of Rare Diseases has been instrumental in raising awareness for rare, and it's time for a Rare Disease Center of Excellence. There are over 10,000 rare diseases, and only a small fraction have therapies. We have to do more, and we can do more. In 2010, we first met with the FDA. It felt like a black box that we were walking into, and we didn't know if they'd listen. We wanted the agency to understand what lived with Duchenne muscular dystrophy feels like. We wanted to talk about what matters to patients and their families, and to understand benefit and risk analysis, what was expected, and what the risk the community was willing to bear. We wanted the FDA to understand that patient voice has a place, a major place, and that patient experience data should be considered to support and expand data in clinical trials. The Friedreich's ataxia approval proved just that. It's a celebratory moment for all of us. The approval is the result of the collection of natural history data over a period of 2 years that demonstrated benefit over those years. It's incredible for Friedreich's ataxia. We can do more. We need to do more. We have to do more. This work and others led to the concept of patient-focused drug development. It can't be just an acronym. That's not fair. FDA agreed that the patient voice was important, but required that voice to be quantified in data and collected in a systematic way. Together with FDA, we worked hard to do that. We collected preference data that was both robust and rigorous. That voice, the patient voice, the preferences of the patient community can be rigorously quantified. We now have preference data, concrete evidence around benefit and risk to understand what matters to patients. These data is readily available and has to be included in the decision-making process. This is why supporting and co-sponsoring the Benefit Act is so important. It will provide transparency around how the FDA weighs critical patient experience data within their benefit risk assessment. The patient voice is essential in rare diseases because rare diseases are complicated, complex, and often outcome measures, as Dr. Caucus just said, take too long to even demonstrate, and we can't let people die while we're planning to look and see what the trajectory is. We know these trajectories. Families want and deserve safe and effective medicines. If we only rely on data collected in the context of a clinical trial, 12 months will tell no story that we can base any approval on. While in a meeting with the FDA, a comment was made to me, "We'll know it when we see it." I wholeheartedly agree. We, of parents of children with rare diseases, or we as human beings with rare diseases, we know it when we see it. We can feel differently how we feel, function, and survive. We have to use biomarkers, as Dr. Caucus said. We, too, are seeing treatment differences in our gene therapy approvals, or in our gene therapy studies. We're also seeing treatment effect, and we can now differentiate between treated and untreated. We know it when we see it. And for that, I'd like to show you a small video. These are 3 boys. They were at a party, and I asked them if I could film them. 2 of them have been in a clinical study. 1 of them has not. This is. Let's see if we can run this film. We do know it when we see it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Pat, and thank you for that video. It's been an incredible panel. I hope you agree. We have learned so much about the landscape of rare diseases. We've learned about the science of rare diseases. We've learned what still needs to be done. We've heard from the investor community. We've heard from patients themselves. As we mentioned at the beginning of this panel and briefing, that this is a new Congress. We have an opportunity to continue to make progress. And so I'd like to close with 2 questions and end it with our patients. As we say, the voice of the patient matters. I'll start with Malkia, and then I'll ask Pat to close us out for this conversation. What would you want this new Congress to do? What is your ask as we think about the urgency of now? What is your request for the new Congress as we go out for further conversations today? Malkia?
My request, you can hear me? My request would be that an emphasis would be placed on health equity so that all have the opportunity to access the treatment and the cures that we need.
In addition to equity, which I think is critically important, I think we need a new paradigm with FDA. The accelerated approval pathway is available to them. They need to use it. Biomarkers are important, and they're a certain definition of a disease. If something's missing and we can replace it, that's good enough. We have to treat the patients with rare diseases. We can't wait until they die to figure it out.
Please join me one more time in thanking this incredible panel. And one final reminder as we close, please remember there is going to be a group photo on the steps of the Capitol at 4:30 p.m. this afternoon, followed by the Rare Artist Reception at 5 p.m. in the Hart Senate Office Building. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Have a great day.
So nice to see you. I'm so sorry. I was stuck.
No, it's fine. It's fine.